Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Sunday, the 19th of February. My name is Brian Liddy, and I'll be introducing you to our two excellent guests. Welcome to both of you by name once I've finished with our traditional Ukraine update, day 361. Moscow has responded to Joe Biden's presidential administration announcing at the Munich Security Conference the US's formal conclusion that Russia has committed crimes against humanity during its nearly year-long war against Ukraine. The US Vice President Kamala Harris said, "In the case of Russia's actions in Ukraine, there is no doubt these are crimes against humanity." Anatoly Antonov, Russia's ambassador to the US, responded on Sunday, "There is no doubt that the purpose of such attacks by Washington is to justify its own actions to fuel the Ukrainian crisis." China's senior diplomat, Wang Yi, one of the few external politicians able to influence Russia, announced that China could launch its peace initiative on the anniversary of the war and has been consulting Germany, Italy, and France on its proposals. China had neither stood by idly nor thrown fuel on the fire regarding the crisis in Ukraine, he said. Western leaders have reacted nervously to the Chinese peace plan for Ukraine, due to be revealed this week, but cautiously welcomed the move as a first sign that China recognises the war cannot be regarded solely as a European affair. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called on the West to double down on its military support to Ukraine. When Putin started this war, he gambled that our resolve would falter, he said. But we proved him wrong then, and we will prove him wrong now. He also offered to help other countries that were willing to send aircraft to Ukraine now. Ukraine must win its battle against Russia's invasion, said Germany's Defence Minister Boris Pistorius, warning that a Russian victory might embolden Moscow to attack other countries. Pistorius said he assured the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that Germany and its allies would help Kyiv for as long as it takes. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said the EU wants to work with the defence industry to quicken and scale up the production of ammunition, both for the Ukrainian military and to replenish stocks at home. It follows warnings from Kyiv that its forces need more supplies quickly. Poland is ready to support Ukraine with its MiG jets, but only if a border coalition is formed with the United States as the leader, said the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. The UK's Ministry of Defence has said it is becoming increasingly difficult for the Russian government to insulate the population from the reality of the war. Air raid alerts were in place across much of western and southern Ukraine earlier on early Saturday, with Ukrainian officials reporting that Russia fired 4 Cllr missiles from the Black Sea. The number of Russian soldiers killed since the invasion has reached 142,270, according to the Ukrainian military. A day earlier, the UK's Defence Ministry said that as many as 60,000 Russian forces may have been killed in just under a year. The MOD said the casualty rate has significantly increased since September 22, when the partial mobilisation was imposed. So that's our update for today on the situation in the Ukraine. I'd just like to welcome our guests. First of all, Vicky, you are Vicky Nicolson. You're an SNP councillor in the City of Edinburgh. You were elected for the first time in May 2022 to represent Inverleith, and you sit on the Edinburgh Integration Joint Board, the Finance Committee and the Pensions Committees of the Council. Vicky, you're also the Edinburgh SNP spokesperson for health and social care, and you're a trade union member. And joining us today, we also have Hugh Marshall. Hugh, welcome, Hugh. Hugh, you're the founder of the National Wales, and Talking Wales, which is the new national news service for Wales. You're also an expert in digital strategy, content creation and marketing support. And Hugh, you're also a regular contributor here to Broadcasting Scotland, and you provide a view from Cymru. So, bore da.
Borada.
And welcome, Vicky. How are you?
Fine, thank you. The first time, so a wee bit
Oh,
nervous. Thank
well,
you for having me.
welcome. Welcome. I'm sure you'll be fine. So I'll move on to our first story then. Um, Glasses. So just maybe to catch up on the Ukraine and the mention of the Munich Security Conference. It says here that the West faced urgent calls to speed up ammunition production and supplies to Kiev in the face of mounting fears of Russia's planning a new offensive, and that China's senior diplomat Wang Yi, one of the few external politicians able to influence Russia, announced that China would launch its peace initiative on the anniversary of the war. And China's already been consulting Germany, Italy, and France on its proposals. Maybe I should just go straight to the questions, which is we're almost at the first anniversary of the invasion in Ukraine. The war is now in its third phase with no sign of end. Is enough being done to end the war? Vicky, I'll ask you first. What do you think? Is enough's being done?
Well, I mean, it's hard to believe that it's a year on the 24th of February since Putin's entrance into Ukraine. I don't think anybody thought we would still be watching these same shocking humanitarian um, crises happening on a daily basis in Ukraine, and certainly I would like to see more being done to help Ukraine. I noticed you mentioned Yang Li, sorry, and the comments from Blinken, the US Secretary of State, were really interesting and strong, and warning strongly against helping Russia. And I, I'm hoping that that's a message that filters through clearly. And Macron also made some interesting comments about not wishing to crush Russia, but bringing them back to the table. Again, that for me is a helpful message to send. So yeah, those are my
Yeah,
thoughts on this.
I've got some of Macron's comments here, which I can give you, and Hugh, find out what you say in a minute. So Macron made some of the more potentially explosive comments. Forgive me. The truly provocative and sometimes riskiest speech came from the French President Emmanuel Macron. He said, I want Russia to be defeated in Ukraine and I want Ukraine to be able to defend its position. He said, but he hit out against those who said he wanted to extend the war to Russia itself in a bid to crush the nation. I don't think, as some people do, that we must aim for a total defeat of Russia, attacking Russia on its own soil. He said, that's never been the position of France and it will never be our position. So that's what you were referring to there, Vicky. Thank you for reminding me. Hugh, what do you think? Do you think that the Chinese proposal is significant? Can they be
Well,
trusted?
you'd hope so, because obviously they are a major global power, and they do appear to have some sort of influence with Russia. But it's just so difficult if you're dealing with Putin, who is he is a megalomaniac. It's beyond just being the leader of Russia. He's overseen corruption at a great scale, stealing the sort of the wealth of Russia from its people and sharing it out amongst himself and his friends. So he's got too much to lose. The only way this is going to end is with Putin being sort of ousted from power, and hope what we would hope is some more sensible leadership come in to place in Russia. But as it stands, that doesn't appear to going to be happening soon. So Ukraine just still needs to have the support. But it's just a very difficult situation, and a very dangerous situation at the moment.
Thanks, Hugh. And just very quickly, Vicky, before we leave this item, do you think can the Chinese be trusted when they say they want to broker a peace deal?
That is a very difficult question. Um, my instinct would say no, and I agree with what you said about Putin and his megalomania. And I think we all felt at the beginning of the war that Putin would be gone quite quickly, and he's still very strong. We know that Putin and China have strong links, and I expect that you know those links continue. I yeah, so no, my gut feeling is that I don't think China can be trusted.
Fair enough, and I suppose we'll find out soon enough as this story develops. Our next item is the situation in Northern Ireland. In the latest sign of the political danger Sunak faces as he attempts to reform the Northern Ireland Protocol, it is understood that Boris Johnson has become concerned that a successful deal will see the government ditch controversial legislation allowing the UK to unilaterally rip up some Brexit arrangements in the region. With Johnson and the Tory right threatening to disrupt the deal, Keir Starmer told The Observer he was taking the extraordinary step of offering the party support in any parliamentary vote on the agreement, enabling Sunak to stop scrambling around to appease an intransigent rump of his own backbenchers. One Whitehall insider said it would be political suicide for Sunak to rely on Labour. Meanwhile, a senior figure from the European Research Group, the ERG, of the Conservative MPs warned it weakens him considerably, that's Sunak, it weakens him considerably. It's proof that he doesn't command his party. That would go down extremely badly in Parliament, but it would also go down very badly with the wider party, who would see that he's in a weak position. It's a big moment, as it says, for how Jeffrey Donaldson in Northern Ireland, as he describes the current state of play in negotiations on the protocol, as well as the UK and EU teams working towards a deal to end a bitter dispute that has fractured relations between London, Dublin, Brussels and Belfast. The next few weeks will be the most difficult of his political career. Stephen Flynn of the SNP told BBC's Laura Kuenssberg this morning that we're in this situation because Boris Johnson lied, because he said his deal was oven ready. But there's extreme issues in relation to the protocol. Brexit has been an unmitigated disaster. So, Vicky, I'll ask you, have you any idea what's actually driving the ERG and the DUP?
Well, I mean, I come from Ayrshire, so acutely aware of the sensitive political history of Northern Ireland, and also acutely aware of the Boris Johnson's proposed legislation inflaming this tension with Westminster and Brussels. What I mean, obviously, the unionist parties argue that placing a border across the Irish Sea will undermine Northern Ireland's place in the UK, and I think that's obviously what the basis of the DUP argument. And being the largest unionist party in Ireland, obviously came second to Sinn Féin in 2022, but still speak the voice of the unionist Ireland. They have to be very strong on Northern Ireland's place in the UK. As for the ERG, well, I mean, we know what kind of Brexit the ERG wanted, and it's it seems to be that they haven't changed their stance on that. To me, I, I'm not sure what will happen after the debate on Tuesday in Westminster. If the protocol arrangements can be resolved, then they potentially don't need a bill. That would be possibly the best case scenario in my mind. I'm not sure what Hugh thinks about that.
Hugh, Hugh, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I agree with what you say. I think the DUP and the ERG are both ideologically quite sort of similarly aligned. The ERG, have power within the Conservative Party because obviously, as over the last few months and years, it's shifted more towards, sort of the old UKIP and Brexit Party turf, and it seems to be a lot of the normal, traditional, what they used to call decent Conservatives seem to have been marginalised. I think it is the DUP. They just seem to be intransigent. Obviously, their whole being is based around the union. The union trumps everything. The fact that Stormont isn't sitting because of this issue, obviously, it needs to be sorted out. But there is somebody made a good point this morning about the first minister, because obviously as it stands, the first minister will be from Sinn Féin with a deputy first minister from the DUP. And it was a mistake because obviously they're both equal standing, but from an image perspective, it gives the impression of one being stronger than the other. They should have had joint first ministers, which would have, I think, gone some way to alleviate the pressure that they're facing now. But it's a tough call. I think it's good that Starmer has come out and said that he will support Sunak, but it does show basically the Conservatives, they're just in the death throes of their political relevance. We've got a year and a half, I think, until the next general election, and as as you can see, it can't come soon enough.
Thank you, Hugh. And yeah, somebody sent me a message which kind of sums it up nicely. It said, it's pretty clear the only way the renegotiated Northern Ireland Protocol will be approved by the DUP is if it includes a clause saying dinosaurs never existed. So that seems quite fitting. What about Hugh? The space you occupy, coming from Wales, do you think the Tory party or the ERG understand either Belfast or Scotland?
Or Wales? I don't. I think that. I don't know. It's difficult in Wales. It's the Conservatives. They still have a level of support. They poll at around 20 to 25%. But the union seems to trump everything with them, and they have become a party of greed. When you see people like Lee Anderson are now being seen as sort of cheerleaders for their party, and Andrew R.T. Davis, the leader of the Conservatives in Wales, his Twitter activities become bizarre in recent months. It's very sort of cheering on the likes of Lee Anderson and going down that road of, I think what they realise now is their best chance at the next election is just to try and appeal to that rump of, extreme right unionists who would back them, through hell and high water. What I don't understand with unionists is, from a Welsh, Scottish, and Northern Irish perspective, is what are the benefits that Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland receive from being within the union? And I still haven't had anybody who can give me one just simple example. It's just ideology, because I think once you lose Scotland and you lose Wales and you lose potentially Northern Ireland, there's no Great Britain anymore. And there's a lot of, I think, English sentiment and British sentiment are intertwined, and they don't want to lose that, that status, because I think they see themselves that they would be diminished on a global stage if they were just England.
Thanks, Hugh. And again, just before we leave this item, quickly, Vicky, I'll just pass Hugh's question over to you. Can you offer any benefits of the union or suggest any?
Well, no, I can't, and that's why I'm an active member of the SNP party and campaign hard for Scotland to be an independent country, because nothing. The union doesn't bring anything to Scotland; it only takes from us.
Okay, thanks, Vicky. Short but sweet. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the biggest news of the week, I would hazard to suggest, which is what's happening now that the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has resigned. Maybe I'll just start by asking both of you. You first, Vicky. What are your what's your immediate reaction, or what was your immediate reaction, and maybe where are you now? Now you've had a couple of days to sleep on it.
Well, my immediate reaction was one of real, devastation. Actually, I wouldn't have thrown my hat in the ring to leave a good career and become a councillor last year had Nicola Sturgeon not been leading the SNP. I don't think she's real inspiration to me and to many others, many women, and men, of course. And I mean, she showed self-awareness, I think, during her speech that was really amazing and reassuring. She'd clearly given it a lot of thought. But once her decision was made, and it was time to go. And I admire and respect that as well. I think that that's the way that I make decisions too. And I think that she had seen that perhaps her presence in that role had become somewhat divisive, although that's not my perception, but and felt that it would be better for her and for Scotland for her to let someone else take the reins. So, yeah, but gutted, I think would be a fair description.
I think it's fair to say that Vicky, that she certainly did leave on her own terms,
Yeah.
which I think is remarkable in the current day and age political situation here in the UK. Hugh,
Well, yeah,
oh, sorry, Vicky, sorry.
I was going to say yes. I mean, she's seen off so many other politicians from Westminster and around the UK, and most of them have left not on their own terms, but because they've had to.
Yeah, I did actually prepare a list of all the the prime ministers and leaders of parties that she's outlasted, but I kind of figured that everybody's really doing that all over the place. I thought I wouldn't burden you or the viewers with it today. But Hugh, I think again you've got an interesting perspective because you're kind of I don't know. I wonder if would you say it's fair to say it's almost like you being in Wales and is it almost like watching two friends have an altercation, between Scotland and England? I'm not really phrasing this very well, but I'll just ask you, what did you think or feel when the announcement came out, and where are you now?
Yeah, it was a shock and a disappointment. I think from us in the independence sort of campaigning in Wales, we looked towards Scotland, and we admired Nicola Sturgeon's leadership and candor during her time as First Minister of Scotland. I think you'd have to be um, an odd person not to agree that she's been excellent in her role. She's a incredibly competent leader, speaker. She has been an inspiration, and similar to Jessica Ardern in New Zealand. The fact that basically just deciding who had the guts for, because I can imagine it is a very stressful job. There have been sort of distractions going on, especially from a UK media perspective, that haven't helped things in recent times. But no, it's a huge loss, and I think for the SNP the challenge is because obviously everybody knows who Nicola Sturgeon is. You're talking about the runners and riders for the leadership of the SNP, and you'd struggle to find many people to be able to name one of them at the moment.
Thank you, Hugh. For me, I've been doing quite a lot of comparing and contrasting since Wednesday's news, and just things like listening to Nicola Sturgeon's speech and then comparing it to other resignation speeches we've heard recently, most memorably Liz Truss after she wrecked the economy, and Boris Johnson before her, when, what was it, his I'll be back, was it, I don't know. Also, just quite often when a leader is forced to go, then you get that kind of quite, the photograph through the back of the car window, usually quite tearful, looking very remorseful. Whereas we had the First Minister waving to people outside Bute House through our window. Again, just completely opposite, to what you would normally expect in this kind of career. But I'd like to, before we go on to each of the people that's standing or not standing for the leadership, I'd like to ask you both. I've been listening to a lot of the commentary and a lot of the national news, the UK-wide news. They seem to be putting forward the notion that now that Nicola Sturgeon has stepped down, the SNP and the independence movement are finished, and who's going to mop up their votes? And most people seem to think it's going to be Labour, which kind of implies that is Nicola Sturgeon has she actually died along with the independence movement? Vicky, what do you think? Do you have anything to say about Labour in the coming weeks and months?
Well, I mean, um, I don't make any secret of the fact that I used to be a member of the Labour Party and joined the SNP in 2014. Um, and I joined as a progressive socialist, and that's the party I want to continue to be part of, the SNP party. And I don't see that Labour offer people like me who were looking for a spiritual home and found it in the SNP a route back in. They, under Keir Starmer, are moving further and further to the right, and there's nothing about what Labour are saying. And I've just listened to Sarwar on the radio before I came on here. There's nothing in what they're saying that reassures me that they could offer anything that is in any way resembling what the SNP offers Scotland.
You're also in a really interesting position being a councillor in Edinburgh, because am I right in thinking
Yeah.
that? So correct me if I'm wrong. I'm happy to be corrected. So I think SNP won in the recent council elections, but Labour have gone into an informal coalition with the Conservative Party to keep the SNP out. Is that right?
Yes, and that's common across Scotland.
So
And the fact that
does that
The Labour Party can choose the
for,
Conservative Party and the Lib Dems, and who are also a large party in Edinburgh, not as large as the SNP, there's two parties as large as ours. But it speaks volumes that Labour would prefer to go into a coalition with the Tories and the Lib Dems rather than their most obvious partner with the closest aligned politics, apart from that one constitutional question. I mean, there's, and so it's all about unionism. It's all about that constitutional question.
so that prism that you can see things through on a day-to-day basis at work, what does that maybe make you? What does it tell you about
It
how
leads
things are
to
going to pan out once we've got a new leader?
Yeah, I mean, it leads to Labour, and sorry, from a council perspective, it leads to Labour giving concessions to the right wing, obviously, in order to get through their decision making, and quite frequently in the council chambers, the Labour, the Tories, and the Lib Dems are voting together, which and voting against us, our progressive left leaning um, policy ideas. And sorry, what does that mean for an SNP leader? Well, I wouldn't support a shift to the right in the SNP party. I'm really very clear about that. I certainly don't think it's the direction that we should be moving in for our country.
Thanks, Vicky. We will get a chance to talk about that right after this. Hugh, your prism is that you're in Wales, um, looking on from Wales, but you've also got a Labour um, Parliament there in Cardiff. So what is that? What do you think then about what's going to happen to the SNP vote when we have a new leader, and will Labour mop up the votes?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously the UK media, obviously they sort of equate Nicola Sturgeon is the SNP, and I think outside of Scotland that is the case because obviously she was seen as the face of the SNP. But as you know, in Scotland, then you've got a different, very different view of what's going on there because obviously you live and breathe that every day. But it's interesting the dynamic between with Labour. And in the SNP in Wales, the Labour government has got a partnership agreement with Plaid Cymru. So obviously Plaid Cymru and the SNP, very very similar parties, very similar policies, very much aligned with each other as independence parties and progressive parties. So in Wales, where Plaid Cymru isn't seen so much as a threat to their power because obviously they've been in power since devolution was granted back at the end of the 90s, and they've had a majority for the last century when it comes to MPs voted from England. But I think it's stupidity really to think that just because people were voting SNP just because of Nicola Sturgeon, I would imagine that most people who vote Plaid Cymru and vote SNP do so because they support independence and the policies of those parties. Obviously, the leadership is a key part of that, but it's not the be all and end all. So I think it's wishful thinking from from a UK press. Because what was interesting as well, at the same time as Nicola Sturgeon was saying that she was standing down, you had Keir Starmer roughly the same time standing in front of two Union Jacks saying that the Labour were going to be the party of patriotism, and we all know what kind of patriotism that is. It's British patriotism, because obviously being British or English nationalist is good, but being Welsh or Scottish nationalist is bad.
Yes, and I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb here and suggest that perhaps the fact that Nicola Sturgeon has stepped down as First Minister, I would think that this is going to be the chance to, it's going to show that the independence movement is bigger than any one person, including Nicola Sturgeon. And I don't think votes are really going to migrate across to Labour instantly any time soon. But let's have a look at the people that are standing. So I'll just do a quick run through, unless things have changed since we came on air. So people who have decided not to stand include John Swinney, the deputy, Joanna Cherry, and Stephen Flynn, and Neil Gray. Joanna Cherry and Stephen Flynn are in Westminster, so it wouldn't be so easy for them, I would say. People who are standing include Humza Yousaf, who's currently health, and Ash Regan, who was a minister but stepped down over the transgender debate. So that leaves the big undecideds as Kate Forbes, finance, Angus Robertson in culture, and there's a lot of people talking about Mary McCallan as a young person who might be a breath of fresh air rather than older, staler candidates. Let's look at Kate Forbes first. So Kate is a front runner to succeed the as SNP leader. Let's see, she's expected. Sorry, this is a little bit out of date. She's been endorsed by Jim McCall, one of Scotland's top business figures, who told the Sunday Times that Forbes was the best candidate to replace Nicola Sturgeon because she had a moral compass. I'll maybe just quickly ask, Vicky, you mentioned moving to the right. Do you think, is religion, I should say Kate Forbes is a member of the Presbyterian Church here in Scotland. And so do you have to have strong religious convictions to have a moral compass?
No. I mean, I grew up as the granddaughter of a Church Scotland minister, and I know lots of people who are religious who have a moral compass. I myself am not religious, and I also think I have a moral compass. So no, I don't think those two things cannot coexist. So no, I mean, this is such an important moment for the SNP, and the decision we make on our leadership is going to paint the picture of what we are and who we are and what we stand for. It's just really important that we choose the right person. But it's early days. We don't even know who's standing yet. So apart from Ash Regan and Humza Yousaf, so probably need to call Canny a wee bit when we start talking about who's going to be the next leader.
Yes, fair point. This is all speculation at this point. So, Hugh, before I'll move on to Humza Yousaf. Humza Yousaf is regarded as being close to Sturgeon, and he confirmed his candidacy with senior SNP figures indicating that he has substantial support and could be difficult for Forbes to beat. I'm getting ahead of myself there. Hugh, we haven't even really been through all the candidates yet, but shall I move on to Ash? Let's move on to Ash Regan then. No, before I leave Humza Yousaf, if he's successful, he's going to be 37 and he would become the first minister from a minority background, as well as he would be the youngest. And I'll maybe just go on to Ash Regan. Vicky, you mentioned her. She's a former minister and SNP rebel. She said the Scottish Government needed to draw a line under certain things and move past them. I believe I am the person to do that. The electorate expect the Scottish Government to focus on things that are important to them. She said that means the NHS, boosting the economy, creating jobs, and dealing with the cost of living crisis. So, Hugh, I'll come to you. that sounds to me just like getting on with the day job, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it sounds like what sort of Starmer is saying in England. But like I say, it's very interesting, from a perspective outside of Scotland, because obviously we're far more aware of the MPs in Westminster than we are of the MSPs up in Scotland. So I know in Wales, there's a lot of support for people like Mhairi Black, but as is the case with Plaid Cymru in Wales, it's very difficult for somebody to be the leader, because basically you need to be a member of the Senedd to be a leader of the party. So I would imagine, if you're looking at Scotland, that they would have to give up their seat in Westminster and somehow get into Holyrood. So that's a big challenge, and I think what would be nice, I think, is just having somebody progressive. I think so many politicians these days, within the UK, tend to be older. Having somebody younger. You look at places like Finland, with the Sarin, who's the prime minister there. So I think having somebody younger, who's more in touch with the people who support independence, because obviously in Scotland and Wales, it's a younger generation who are far more supportive of independence. So having somebody younger who is in touch with that generation and can not just lead independence, but then can actually take Scotland through the first years of that independence, I think would be key. But I think it's interesting to note as well, sort of Nicola Sturgeon stood down this week, that Mark Drakeford has announced prior to the last elections that he wasn't going to serve a full term. So we're waiting to hear from him to see when he will be standing down and when there'll be a new leadership campaign within the Welsh Labour Party for a leader. But that's expected to happen in the next year. Sadly, I think one of the reasons Mark Drakeford was going to stand down was to spend more time with his family, and unfortunately his wife passed away recently. So that's very, very sad for Mark Drakeford. But I don't think that'll change his idea then to hand over the reins to somebody new, who will then lead Welsh Labour into the next election. But it's going to be interesting there again, is do they go with somebody who's progressive, or do they go with somebody who's going to take them more to the right?
Thanks, Hugh. And as well as that, I think there's also the question of whether, so I'm just going to pick two names, because Kate Forbes certainly is incredibly capable, and I can certainly see her as First Minister. But think about, say, maybe if we take Angus Robertson and then the young Mary McCallan. Angus Robertson, he's kind of like me, he's male, stale, and white. I'm thinking Stephen Flynn and Mary, you mentioned Hugh, Stephen Flynn and Mary Black. I think they've shown a complete breath of fresh air in Westminster. Vicky, I'll maybe come to you first. Do you think that Angus Robertson and that kind of generation, my generation, we've kind of made a mess of the environment and the likes, and really it's really younger people that are mostly, if you look at the polls, it's younger people that are really in favour of Scottish independence. So should we hand it over to them and the likes of Mary McCallan and let the young people do it their way?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, what would I saw Mary at a conference, and I was really impressed by her. I saw her in Question Time a few years ago, and I texted a friend saying, "Who is that on Question Time? She's fantastic." She's really smart, and she can, cut through the crap, if you like, and get to the root of the issue. However, we've got then the kind of statesman like Angus Robertson, who is absolutely dedicated to Scotland being in the EU and is really experienced. He's been committed, like Nicola Sturgeon, being committed to the SNP since a very early age, and he brings great gravitas and intellect. So, yeah, you've got the two different strands, as you say, but we don't just need young voters. We need older voters too. And just as young people are coming through and, committed to independence, we need to not lose people who are getting to an older age and maybe turning away from the more progressive politics. So it's trying to balance that, and how do we appeal to everybody, and how do we encourage people to understand that an independent Scotland is a Scotland for everybody, and a Scotland where we're committed to making sure everybody has a better life and we live in a fairer country.
Thanks, Vicky. And just before we move on, I would just like to say that there's one question that I haven't seen tackled in anywhere in the media, and that is, who's going to start the collection for Nicola Sturgeon at work, and and what are they going to get her for when she leaves? I don't know if either of you want to sort of hazard a guess at answering.
One thing I heard today on the radio was Dame Helena Kennedy talking about the brutality of politics, and I don't think we've really touched on that, and Nicola herself used the word brutal. And I know I'm going off at a bit of a tangent, but when I was standing, my eldest daughter, who's 25, helped me set up my Twitter for the first time. I'd had a Twitter account, but I'd never used it. And within days of having this Twitter account set up, the comments, the people retweeting, it was dreadful, and to the point that my daughter took away my Twitter and blocked many people, and I think we've got this very unkind culture at the moment, and that's enabled by social media. And it still makes it difficult for me as a sort of middle-aged woman coming into politics from a job where that type of thing never happened to me. It worries me about young people, particularly young women, coming into politics and having to face that on a daily basis, because it does grind you down sometimes.
You're
Just wanted
absolutely
to add that. Haven't talked about it.
No, you're absolutely right to bring that up, because it is absolutely caustic, and that is key to what was in the First Minister's reasons for her just deciding to step down. And just before we do move on, there was a very good example in a newscast podcast the other day with Kirsty Wark, where she recalled she'd been chatting to both, I think, Nicola Sturgeon and Val McDermott about an incident. I won't go into it and bore you, I'll just seek it out, where Val McDermott invited Nicola Sturgeon to dinner, and about the security arrangements that had to be sort of moved and put into operation. And then when people found out about the meal, about what was said on Twitter afterwards, apparently was vile. So yes, you're absolutely right. We should definitely mention that. But so let's move on to the next item, which is the cost of living crisis. More people are depending on food banks than ever before in Britain, new figures show, as ever-increasing numbers of households, including pensioners, NHS staff and teachers, seek help amid the cost of living crisis. New research by the Independent Food Aid Network, shared with The Observer, found that almost 90% of food banks surveyed reported increased demand in December 2022 and January 2023 compared with a year earlier. The Trussell Trust, which has more than 1,300 food banks in the UK, expects this winter will have been its busiest ever, and figures published last week by the Office for National Statistics showed how, despite inflationary pressures easing, the cost of living crisis is still raging. Food inflation is at 16.7%, and the cost of gas is nearly 130% higher than a year ago. The Office for Budget Responsibility forecast in November that households' disposable income would fall by 4.3% in 2022-23, the largest drop since comparable records began in 1956. So my question to both of you is, are there any plans to really deal with this? Vicky, as a working politician, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I was a single parent for many years. Well, I still am. My youngest is 14. If I had been in the situation I was in when my eldest daughter was young, right, if I was in that position right now, I would be using a food bank. There is no way that I could afford food right now. I mean, I go into the shops myself and I'm shocked at the cost of everyday essentials. It's horrendous, and it is directly related to Brexit. And I know we talk about the war in Ukraine as well, and I'm sure that has an impact. But the way that food prices have gone in this country, can be directly attributed to Brexit. And I believe that in the last 5 years, food bank use in Scotland's gone up by 65%. It's just such an enormous figure. And welfare fund applications in Scotland for crisis grants increased 31% in 1 year from September 21 to 22. And we're fortunate in Scotland, we have a welfare fund. I don't believe the rest of the UK does in the same way. And everybody should be able to afford essentials. And that's what, an independent Scotland will look like in my mind. Everybody can afford to heat their homes and feed their wains. And I've recently become a trustee of a local neighbourhood centre where we've set up a warm bank, and we're talking about food poverty. We're talking about people not being able to clothe their children, and Scotland, we're using all the financial levers available to us, but it's not enough. And if you look around the world at similarly sized economies, Norway and Sweden, and particularly Northern Europe, people are not experiencing what we're experiencing here, and it shouldn't be happening.
Thanks, Vicky. Hugh, how about how is it where you are in terms of cost of living crisis?
Yeah, I think it's bad. It's interesting. We have in Wales we have the Bevan Foundation, which does a lot of research into sort of democracy, economy, and stuff, and they provide a poverty snapshot. And I think they published the most recent one a couple of weeks back that was looking at the condition in Wales, and just the basic were 1 in 8 households was saying they didn't have enough for all the basics. 4 in 10 going without heating in the home. 1 in 4 eating smaller meals or skipping meals in entirety. Debt is a big problem. 1 in 10 concerned about the prospect of losing the home due to mortgages. But I think it's the fact that the cost of living crisis, the hardship, is being faced by different groups. So obviously people on benefits, disabled, social renters, adults under 65, unpaid carers, they're being impacted far more than others. And there are sections in society, and I'd imagine a lot of people who vote Conservative, who buy the Daily Mail, who bought their houses in the 70s for 20 quid and don't have a mortgage, and are on full pensions. They're not being impacted by this, but the fact that we're normalising the use of food banks, and schools now, we encourage schools to take in old school uniforms, so the families who maybe can't afford to buy a uniform can have old pieces of uniform. But it's just the normalisation of that food banks are the norm, and we're talking about oh, why don't people go without breakfast? People shouldn't go hungry. People should be able to live decent lives without having to worry about where the next meal is coming from or whether they can heat their homes. That's just a basic part of society, and the fact that we're powerless in Wales because we don't have the sort of the economic levers to do much here. Although the government are trying to mitigate the situation, but it's just really hard, and it's really sad. And the fact that you've got 1 in 4 kids in Wales living in poverty, 1 in 3 in constituencies. A lot of those constituencies are Labour constituencies, so they're hoping that Labour are going to get in to Westminster and everything's going to change. But as far as I can see from their economic policy, they're just going to carry on with things as they are. And that's the worry, is that we need things to change at Westminster if we haven't got independence, and it doesn't look like it's happening. And that's why I think we need independence, because it gives us an opportunity to follow a different path and a better path, one that's based on fairness and not on greed.
Thank you, Hugh. Yeah, it's a sobering situation, right enough. I've heard a lot of people, commentators, saying that things like heating and a full belly should be considered a basic human right. So let's just hope that does get traction and becomes a reality. I've got two stories left, one of which is very important and is Westminster based and mostly to do with things that are going on in England, matters that are devolved to Scotland and Wales. But I'm going to move on to if we've got time, I'll come back to that. Excuse me, but I'm going to move on to a story, or a news item about baby boxes, which I think, Vicky, you'll be particularly well placed to talk about. So Scotland's Baby Box provides families with a range of essential items for the first 6 months of their baby's life. The APS Group Scotland, which has the managing agent contract for Scotland's Baby Boxes, conducted a cost analysis which determined that if parents were to buy the box and all the contents individually, the cost would be approximately £429. 250,000 baby boxes have been delivered to expectant parents so far, and this milestone was reached ahead of the popular scheme's 6th anniversary this summer. One Parent Families Scotland Chief Executive Satwat Reman said, "With rising costs, single-parent households are under increasing pressure to meet the costs of looking after their children. Having just one income with costs associated with a newborn is very difficult. And the essentials contained within the baby box go a long way to easing that for single parents." So, Vicky, I'd like to ask your view on that before I find out what Hugh's view is in Wales. Tell me, what do you think?
Well, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really, isn't it? I mean, if I was a young single mum now and I was getting a baby box, it would be life-changing. If I'd got it then, it would have been life-changing. I've yeah, I'm so pleased that Scotland has these types of policies where we want to level the playing field for everybody, and we want to make sure every single child, in this case, every single baby has the same start in life. And I've seen them; they're marvelous, and I know people who've had them, and there's not one thing in them that isn't come in handy and isn't. It's not like when I had my babies, there was the bounty woman in the hospital that harass you
Mm.
to try and get you to buy products. This is it's free, and that's what a fair taxation system ultimately should deliver in an independent Scotland is quality public services, free at the point of delivery and for everybody universally. So that's my dream.
Thanks, Vicky. And Hugh, have you got any experience of baby boxes in Wales?
No, we don't have them, unfortunately. But again, it's a great example of sort of just common sense policy that gives everybody an opportunity to start life. And I think these are the things that it's the long term health benefits of giving people and children the best start in life. It has it's the long term benefits as well. I think that politics does tend to focus on the short term, winnable, gimmicks and policies. But I remember when the baby boxes came out of Scotland, they were derided, but in the media and in the press by the opposition parties, and it's sad. It's the sort of thing that everybody should say, well, yeah, it's great, it's a good idea, and we should be doing more of this kind of thing, across society.
Yes, you've reminded me then of those kind of toxic videos where that were put online where they would apply a torch, a flame torch to a baby box, and oh look, it burned. But Vicky, question for you: do you think baby boxes should maybe be expanded, and perhaps like maybe a child would get a box when they start school?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, there are lots of local initiatives like that, where children are provided with the essentials for starting school. But something universal, I think, would be very welcome. Yeah, yeah, why not? Is that something that's being floated? I've not heard about that.
It actually comes from Andrew Wilson, who's our
Okay,
usual. Yeah, and he sent me that question, so all credit to him for asking
it's
that.
a good
It's
question.
not mine, but yeah, I think it's a great idea. Um, Hugh, I'd like to, instead of asking you more about baby boxes, I'm tempted to use our last couple of minutes to go into that one story that we leapfrogged. All I've got to do now is find the right page that it starts on. So This is about Westminster Sleaze, you'll be pleased to know. Try and read this quickly. David Pryor, the former Tory minister who chaired NHS England, helped arrange a meeting for an American private health firm that paid millions of pounds to the investment bank that employed him. He emailed Matthew Gould, a senior NHS executive, in February 2021, asking him to have a conversation with the chief executive of a company called Teladoc, a multi-billion-pound virtual medicine firm. I'm just going to try, because time's short, I'm going to try and really truncate this. Basically, Pryor has previously faced questions after arranging for collapsed firm Greensill, and also linked to allegations about a COVID VIP lane after introducing a testing company to the Department of Health, which later won COVID contracts. This is essentially, in my understanding, is the possibility that the NHS in England is closer to being privatised, with big companies from outside being asked to come in. For me, it's primarily an English Westminster item, because health is devolved in both Scotland and Wales. But where's my question? Vicky, I'll move to you quickly. What do you think? We've only got a couple of minutes left.
Well, I've read a little bit about this, and it made me think about. I've brought two motions to full council where I've not been allowed to speak to my own motion because of conflict of interest. One was to ask Lothian Pension Fund to divest from fossil fuels, but because I'm on the pension committee, that was seen as a conflict of interest, so I had to get someone else to speak to that motion. The next one was about funding of neighbourhood centres across the city, and then the Lib Dems brought an addendum, I think, where they named the neighbourhood centre I'm a trustee of. So again, I couldn't speak on it because of conflict of interest. Yet David Pryor, who's the chair of NHS England, can arrange a meeting with a company that recently bought Consultant Connect, who already offer remote health in NHS England, and then give them another valuable foothold into the NHS. It's absolutely disgusting, and it would not happen in Scotland. It's a disgrace. And
Thank you.
yeah, disgusting.
Yeah, thanks for a bit more information there, Vicky. Hugh, my question maybe to you is, how can the health services in Scotland and Wales both be protected, particularly in light of the Internal Markets Act?
Well, it is hard because obviously the commitments in Wales from Plaid, Labour, Lib Dems and Greens is to have, the NHS, a free NHS that's available to everybody. Obviously, Wales sort of led the way with free prescriptions, which is seen as a huge benefit. But I think when it goes back to Westminster and these stories, is we're just becoming numb to them. There's so many of them, and it just seems to be the norm for Conservatives and their cronies, that everything involves deals in order to make money. It just seems to be the thing that drives and motivates them, is making money. That's the thing that they're obsessed with, and they'll do anything to do that. And when you look at the last past prime ministers, you had one that managed to crash the economy in a day, having been in the job for 2 weeks, and then the previous one who is mired in so many different stories about loans and stuff. It's beyond belief, but it isn't. And I just find it incredible that there's still 25% of the UK population willing to vote for them, even with all this stuff that's out there.
Thank you, Hugh. Well, that pretty much brings us to the end of the show. Vicky, I hope this is your first show, I hope it hasn't been too bad or too traumatic, and you'll come back again sometime.
Oh, absolutely. I've enjoyed myself.
Okay, good. We'd love to have you.
Lovely to meet you both.
Thank you.
And you.
And Hugh, likewise, again, thank you for giving up some of your Sunday time. I'm just a wee bit concerned. The rooster that we heard earlier on, is it okay? I haven't heard it for a while, not since the start of this.
He's gone for a walk. We've actually got two. We've got a big one and a small one. And
Okay.
yeah, he usually starts about 5 o'clock in the morning. So I think he's having a rest.
Okay, that's good to know. As long as he's all right, that's the main thing. So I'm going to say Diolch. Is that how you pronounce it?
Diolch. Yeah.
Okay, and thank you. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Vicky. So it just remains for me to say that that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just wanted to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Right now, we have a pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay our bills and to ensure that we are able to continue making programmes. But in the meantime, goodbye. And before I say goodbye, I think tomorrow, please do tune in for Scotland at 7, where I think you're going to be stuck with me again, giving you the news tomorrow. So in the meantime, goodbye and thank you for watching.